A British ship that's set to house hundreds of American soldiers who are currently constructing a floating pier off Gaza's coast has set sail from Cyprus. The temporary dock is intended to be a gateway for the 90 truckloads of international aid to be delivered into Gaza every day. It's hoped it will ease the suffering of Palestinians who are grappling with a dire humanitarian situation. The UN says, though, that it's not enough. It insists the answer is rather to increase the flow of humanitarian aid by land. For more on the humanitarian situation on the ground, I'm joined by Scott Lucas, who's a professor of international politics at the Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin. The US has announced that the pier to distribute humanitarian aid to Gazans is now under construction. Some, though, are sceptical about how long it could take. What are their concerns?
You have issues that, you cannot put a pier up overnight. So, we're talking about well into the spring before it would finally be constructed. But then you have a serious issue, which is, okay, you've brought aid to the pier, but how do you get it further into Gaza? The Americans have said that not a single American troop will be involved in taking it on the ground. We don't really have a commitment from an international force to oversee the aid deliveries. You're going to be relying again on NGOs. You're going to be relying on Gazans themselves. And we know that Israel, of course, has attacked. In fact, they've killed about 200 aid workers throughout this conflict. So, until you have a secure situation, and that means really an end to the war and the attacks inside Gaza, you still have uncertainty about the distribution of the aid. Since Israel killed seven staff of the World Central Kitchen a few weeks ago and faced U.S. pressure to stop doing that, there's been a slight increase in aid. There's been some increase in aid across border crossings, but it's nowhere near the level that we had before October 7th, when even then Gaza was being blockaded. So I hate to be pessimistic here, but right now the pier is really more of a symbolic effort and won't have a meaningful change in getting aid to Gazans unless you have significant developments inside Gaza itself on the ground.
So you're clearly sceptical too. And just on the delivery of aid, UK forces may be deployed to help deliver the aid. What do we know at this stage?
Well, we know that the UK, of course, is providing housing for American forces who will be creating the pier. That's what you just reported. What is unclear right now is whether any UK forces will go into Gaza itself, would the Americans say that they won't do so. Right now, London's withholding any comment. If the UK deployed forces to protect the aid going in, that makes a difference. That makes a significant difference. But I'd be very, very surprised at this point if Britain would make that commitment, especially without the Americans doing so.
And the UN has warned that the famine in the Gaza Strip is almost inevitable and that children are starving to death. The World Food Programme has agreed to lead the delivery operation, but the UN agency also says that Israel must ensure that aid workers aren't harmed. They're going to be screening, Israel is of course going to be screening the aid going in. Is that going to complicate the situation?
It's complicated the situation since October 7th because Israel still has an effective veto over the aid that goes into Gaza. And we're not just talking about material that Hamas could use. Israel has withheld supplies for the civilian population, including foodstuffs. The serious issue that you talk about, which is security for the aid workers, remains. American military gave a briefing 2 days ago for journalists, and they talked on and on about deconfliction arrangements. Look, supposedly we've had deconfliction arrangements with the Israelis for months, and yet the aid workers still have been working under threat. I'm just going to reinforce this point. You're talking about a possible ceasefire. I'm very skeptical that's going to happen until you actually get a pause in hostilities, if not a ceasefire. Then any delivery of aid is going to be problematic because you're doing it in a war zone.
And just on that ceasefire, talks are ongoing to clinch a new deal and to get the release of hostages. What are the sticking points, though?
Well, we're awaiting the details of the Israeli counterproposal to Hamas that Hamas made on April the 13th. But here are the fundamental lines as we await the details of that. Hamas will demand a permanent ceasefire. Now, it may be stages towards a ceasefire. So we start off with a month, 6 weeks, but then there is a clear timetable for a second pause in hostilities leading to a permanent ceasefire. Hamas will insist upon a permanent withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Now, that may be staged, but Israel would have to say it's going to withdraw its forces. And I see no sign that Israel is going to do that, especially Prime Minister Netanyahu. Indeed, the one detail I find most striking is that when Israel returned its counterproposal via Egypt to Hamas, it did so with an ultimatum, which is if you don't accept this counterproposal, we could be launching a ground assault on Rafah, where those more than 1 million Gazans are sheltering very, very soon. I don't think Hamas will bow down to that ultimatum. So rather than looking at a ceasefire, I'm looking at an assault on Rafah being the next stage of this conflict.
Scott Lucas, Professor of US and International Politics at the Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin. Thank you so much for joining us here on France 24.
Thank you.